right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whenever it is. We are in our Unashamed series here on Paul's letter to the Romans, people in Rome. This is the devotional for March 9th, 2017. Our text for today is Romans 4, 13 through 15. So 3 short little verses here. Let me read it to you, or if you're watching, you can read along with me. Let me blow it up a little bit. There you go. Verse 13. For the by the way, if you, I would always encourage before you get into this, I would pause this and reread the first 13 chapter verses. Kind of get some context for where we're going, because I'm not going to be able to get into that. I'm assuming you've listened to the past amazing starters that have been delivered. So yeah, have some sort of context before you jump into this, but I'll try to make this stand alone as best I can, but you'll just get a lot more if you know the surrounding context of it. So, and keep in mind everything that's been talked about in chapters 1, 2, and 3 from our series on Saturday nights and City Life groups and previous starters. So all that, here we go, verse 13. For the promise to Abraham or to his descendants that he would be heir of the world was not through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if those who are of the law are the heirs, then faith is made void and the promise is nullified. For the law brings about wrath, but where there is no law, there's also no violation. So a few questions to think about. If anything, right, kind of 3 stages of starter are asking people, so you can stop this here in a second, but the first stage we ask is why we have it 1, 2, and kind of 3 here, is just kind of get into the word, just chew on this. So if you need to stop this right now, or this is all you can read, just chew on these 3 verses and think about different things and let God speak to you, ask his Holy Spirit to illuminate some things to you. That'd be great. Okay. Second step is, hey, if you don't have any questions, or you get some time to think about some questions, we can all kind of think together. Here's 3 questions that kind of I have, and then the third part is just kind of me giving my reflection. So kind of 3 stages to starter. So even if every week, every day, I mean, you can't look at the questions and think about them and think about what our commentary, at least you kind of see that's what we're trying to do. So most important thing is getting the word, right? That's where the word starter comes from, is start getting in the word. So we're trying to start doing it, and then also give you some questions to think about, as well as some commentary to think about as well. So here's kind of my questions, some things that I thought about, and I got plenty more. This kind of get me started at least. First question is, where and when, especially looking at verse 13, right? Where and when did God promise Abraham that he'd be heir of the world, right? And what does that even mean, right? He says him or descendants that they'd be heir of the world. Okay, where does this phrase come from, this idea, and what does that even mean, right? Okay, second question, I'm looking at verse 14. What does verse 14 do to our identity, right? Namely, I'm thinking about how and what we identify ourselves with. For if those who are of the law are the heirs, then faith is made void and promise nullified. Some cool implications there. And then even just overall looking at the whole thing, right? These 3 verses, compare and contrast them with Genesis chapter 3, which is the story of the fallen man, Adam and Eve eating from the tree. And then as you think about that, what are the implications of that? And they're huge, 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 huge. So if you don't get anything I get to, we'll get to that third question, really focusing on that. So let's take it 1, 2, 3. Let's take it bit by bit here. Where, when did God promise Abraham that his descendants would be the heir of the world, and what the heck does that even mean? So again, let's remind ourselves of a couple facts before we look at the text of where Paul's getting this from. So remember, that this is quoting ideas and verbiage from the Old Testament, which was written in Hebrew. I don't even know, it depends on who you talk to, this is debated. I don't even know if Abraham spoke Hebrew at the first time these were given, but some sort of Hebraic language. Back then they used what we would probably call like hieroglyphics. So it's not like Hebrew like we think about it. So if God spoke to Abraham in what we would call Hebrew, that's not 100% accurate, I don't think. But again, scholars differentiate on that, and there's some debate on that. But the idea is that he did not speak in Greek. He definitely did not speak in English, right? So when we read that he would be the heir of the world, you got to take that with a little bit of salt and kind of, okay, what does that concept even mean, heir of the world, right? So let's go to this. I have this list here. Genesis 26. I pulled up here, so I want you to focus on this part down here, the cross-reference side, this right over here. I'm going to show you where this, so I'll show you in sequential order where the Genesis 26 plays in. So you see Galatians, Paul talks about this later, and we'll talk about that in a second, but the first reference that he's talking about it here in Genesis 12:3, where God says to Abraham, I'm going to bless you, bless those who bless you. This is a whole thing he says, is leave your family, your country, your family, all you know, go to a land I'll show you, I'll make you a great nation, I'm going to multiply you. And then he says, those who bless you, I'm going to bless. And then the one who curses you, I'm going to curse. And then here's the promise. So this is what the promise. So most of the time, almost exclusively the New Testament, this is the promise, capital T. And in you, okay, or through you, or in your descendants, this is where you see Paul picking up on this, all of the families of the earth will be blessed. Okay, again, that's English. You missed that. That's what he says it to Paul. Okay, and then if you look here, New American Standard, you see this is now, so he said to Abraham, and this is Isaac, God is talking to you in Genesis 26. It says, I'll multiply your descendants, your seeds, right, as the stars of the heaven. I'll give your descendants to these lands. And here you go. And by your descendants, by your seed, all of the nations, that word nations and families, so the word nations, nations right there, and then families right here are the same word, goyim. Okay, same word. All of the peoples, every people group, ethnic group is the best way of translating that, of the earth will be blessed. So he says it there, and then we go, it says all Isaac as well, 26, yep, still Isaac, and then go to 28. 28:14, here you go, 28:14, so now this is Jacob. So he says to Abraham, now he says to Isaac, and then next chronologically we have Jacob. Okay, and here's what he says, Genesis 28:14. Your descendants, your seed, will be like the dust of the earth, and you'll spread out to the west and to the east and the north and the south. And here it is. And in you and in your descendants shall all of the families, there it is again, of the earth be blessed. Okay? So you can see this a few other times, and you see Paul picks it up in Galatians, right? The scripture foresaw that God would justify the goyim, okay, the ethnic group. No, in Greek, this is ethne, where we get the word ethnic group, same idea as families, nations, okay, the goyim, by faith, and foretold of the gospel to Abraham, okay, saying, all the nations will be blessed through you. So if you know Genesis 12, you know the gospel. Okay, that's what he's talking about. This is why in Hebrew text, the New Testament and throughout the Old Testament, God is always referred to as God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why only these three? Why not Noah? Why not Enoch? Why not Joseph? Why not David? Why not Solomon? Why not Samuel? Why not Samson? Why not Gideon? Why not Deborah? Like, why not all these other people? Why just these three main patriarchs? Because these three patriarchs were recipients of the repeated promise. And what was the promise? That they would be here as Paul says it, the heir of the world. Okay, so when and where God promised Abraham, but also Isaac and Jacob, you see there in Genesis. What does that even mean? Okay, that means they would be heir, or they would inherit, or through them would come the inheritance, let's say it that way, inheritance of the world. Okay, which we're going to get to here in this last part, but we'll go ahead and kind of mention it here. I guess this is probably a good time as all to mention it. Okay, this is why this one for question 3 here. Genesis 3, heirs of the world. You got to remember what happened in Genesis 1 through 11, which is the fall of the world, the brokenness, okay? The 4 relationships that God had perfectly created in Genesis 1 and 2. And Genesis 3 through 11, you see they're broken, especially in Genesis 3 is kind of the catalyst. But then you see the effects of that all the way to Genesis 11. Okay, these 4 broken relationships, if you don't know, is a relationship between God and mankind, between mankind and themselves, right? Kind of a psychological brokenness between mankind and other mankind, right? Human beings relationship, okay? Kind of sociology, and also between mankind and the earth, okay? The earth itself is broken, okay? Kind of ecological or biological issue. There's brokenness there, right? So these 4 relationships are broken, and this is the world that you see was lost. And this is a picture of the world that you'll see to come if you look into Revelation. That's why in Genesis 3 you have, in Genesis 1 and 2 you have the Garden of Eden, and then Revelation 21 and 22 you have the city of God, which is kind of the new improved garden grown now exponentially, right, because of the gospel. So here's what God is saying in Genesis 3. The world is broken, the mankind has fallen, these 4 relationships are destroyed. But Abraham, you see that play out in Genesis 3 through 11. It starts in Genesis 3 just with Adam and Eve, and then you see it expand to their family, to all the world except for Noah. He's still good. But then by the end of 11, you see the entire world completely in shambles. God pulls this one person, Abraham, out in Genesis 12. It says, Abraham, come on out. By faith, go do what I'm asking you to do. Trust me. And if you do that, through you, all the world will be blessed. You will become heir, and your descendants will be great. And through you and through your descendants, all the nations of the earth, all the goyim, all the ethnic groups of the earth will be blessed. So this is what he's saying. For the promise, that's the promise, okay, to Abraham and his descendants. You just read that they would be heirs of the world. That's what that means. That promise was not through law. Okay, we talked about this in City Life Groups this past week, right? That it wasn't like Abraham, if you obey the 613 commandments of the Mosaic law given through Moses on Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus, then the promise is to you. But like, no. Just, I'm telling you, I'm electing, I am choosing. Our free will people hate this. I have chosen you. I have predestined you, Abram, and your descendants to do this, right? That was not through law, but it was through the righteousness that comes by faith. Okay, that is a huge distinction in what we're talking about here in verse 14, right? That says the second question. For if those who are of the law are the heirs, then faith is made void, pointless, wasteless, might as well throw it out, and the promise that God made to him, to Abraham and his descendants, is nullified, is void, is rubbish, is not going to happen. Okay? So here's what he's saying. Let's make sure we make sense of this. If those who are of the law are the heirs, right? If it's not through faith that Abraham and we are saved, but it is through law. If the promise that God's going to fix the world in these 4 regulations was based on the fact that we need to obey the law, we need to be good doers, we need to vote Republican or vote Democrat, we need to be pro-life or pro-choice, we need to be all about Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter or All Lives Matter, whatever stance you take. If you don't do these certain things, you're not in with God. If that is the way you look at things, that's a law. Okay? If you don't obey the 10 Commandments, if you don't pray X amount of times, if you don't handle suffering the perfect way, if you can't forgive people, if you can't love people, if you don't tithe, if you don't go to church, whatever the law is, if obeying the law perfectly is the way that the way that faith and relationship with God works, then it's void. And if that's the way, then the promise is nullified because we'll never be able to perfectly do that. That's Paul's whole premise in chapters 1 through 3, right? So he's saying, look, if those who are heirs is because of the law, well, then the promise will never, ever be fulfilled because we'll never live up to our side of the deal. And it's not about faith, right? Faith is not works. Faith is the opposite of the law. Faith is the idea of I simply just believe God will do it. And I don't simply believe, but with all of my heart, it's a very actually hard thing to do. Everything in me, right? So faith is, we know as Christians, right? If we said, let's just get rid of the word faith, let's just all be about obeying the law. As Christians, we would cease to have a belief system, okay? And that's terrible, right? So the faith is made void, but we know faith is a huge, huge deal. That is all about the Bible, everything. So faith is that way, if law that way. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense to you, right? So think about who Paul is. Let's go to the second question here. How does that affect and what does that do to our identity? How we identify. Now remember what Paul is saying. Okay, now by nature, the natural order of things, biologically, the physical descendants of Abraham are the Jews, the Hebrews. And after the Exodus, they got the law. Okay, and now, by the way, if you read Exodus, okay, this is something that Hebrews have forgotten for a long time. And if you remember in the Exodus, it wasn't just Jews that exited Egypt and got the law. It actually was a mixed multitude of races. You can go back, Exodus 12, I believe, gives you some insight onto that. Okay, so, but that was the problem they made. It's like, no. The children of Abraham, the descendants of Abraham, the heirs of the promise of Abraham are only those biologically Jewish, right? Genealogically Jewish. They're the laws. They're the ones who get the law. So the law and the heirs and the promise, therefore, is only through those who obey the law perfectly. Or some would say those who are children of the law, which would be Jewish. So Jews and those who also perfectly obey him, those are there. But then Paul says, nope, it's by faith. The descendants of the world, they're not it didn't come through the law, through your ethnic tribe, through your religious system, but it comes through faith. Okay, so what does this do for identity? Keep in mind who Paul's writing to in Rome, both Gentiles and Jews. He's trying to break down this whole Jewish superiority complex that people are having in early Christianity. And he's really trying to say, listen, and he doesn't negate the importance of the Jewry. That's incredibly important. And we'll visit that later in chapters 9 through 11. Okay, being Jewish ethnically is actually incredibly important. But he also says being a Jew is not something you are ethnically. It's not something of the circumcised, but of the uncircumcised. He's not a Jew who's a Jew outwardly, but one inwardly. So there is an importance to that aspect of things. But listen, he's saying your identity, what gets you a relationship with God is this F word right there, not this L word right there. It is through faith, not by law. So this has got to dramatically change how we identify ourselves, right? The way the people that we think are the disgusting problems of the world, or if you don't think anybody disgusting, but if you look at somebody and shake your head, tisk, the world would be a better place without those kind of people. And I get it. There's some really bad people out there, and maybe you'd be true. But here's the thing we have to understand, that if God just was to wave his hand and get rid of all the evil in the world, do you realize that would mean he'd get rid of you as well, and me? That evil isn't something that we all innately have because we all do not follow the law. Everybody. That is not how we identify ourselves, right? I am a white man. I am an American white man. I am from the clan Willis. That's my people, okay? We are Irish, Scottish, British, French, German, a little bit of Cherokee, Indian, and probably a bunch of other stuff I'm not even aware of ethnically. But that is not how I identify myself. Jesus says it this way: if you love your father, your mother, your wife, your kids, your sister, your brother, even your own self more than me, you're not worthy to be my disciple. Okay? He even says if you love them more than me, because if you don't hate them, that means our love for God should be such a way, our identity with God, identifying our sense of purpose, approval, who we are, should be so in Jesus that it makes it look like we hate those other things. We don't, and we should be proud of, not proud in a bad way, proud of like, it's okay that I'm white and I get St. Patty's Day coming up in a week, right? It's cool to celebrate that and get into that. That's not a bad thing. It's not bad being white, but it's not how I identify myself. It's not what I identify myself with, the question down here. And that goes true for however you identify yourself. Okay? We are simply the type of people who say, listen, I can't obey the law. I'm evil. There's a part of me that's evil inside of me. And my faith is in God and in this promise that through the people of faith, the restoration of the world is going to come. And namely the faithful one through the promise of that. That should radically change that. And that's kind of the implications with Genesis 3 down here as well. The implications of this being idea of, listen, the solution to the world is not political. The solution to the world is not economical. All those things are going to come and go, ebb and flow. Read your history books. The solution to the world is this promise that God made. And God said to Abraham, listen, don't do anything. I'll do it. Trust me. Just follow me. And it's the same promise Jesus. Hey, listen, come with me. Trust me. Just follow me. It doesn't matter what you do. Just come follow me. Have a relationship with me. And the more people that he connects back to him, that changes everything. So the implications of that are very, very broad. I wrote this quote down here. It's from Calvin's commentary here. It says, for they who despise the known will of God justly deserve to sustain a heavier punishment than those who offended the will of God through ignorance. And I put for me on here, religion versus the gospel is law versus faith. This is the biggest implication of me reading these 3 verses, is this idea of religious versus gospel. As a church, especially if you go to City Life Church, but if you're a Christian out there, the ability for us as followers of Christ to delineate to the rest of the world the difference between traditional, what is taken as traditional Christianity versus what is actually what the Bible teaches the gospel Christianity is, we've got to make a distinction. We've got to understand it ourselves. We've got to be able to articulate it, and we've got to be bold enough to articulate it. Listen, no. We are not those of law. You don't inherit through law. We're not of those who are about keeping the right versus keeping the right. Now, don't hear I'm not saying. We do believe in doing the right thing and keeping the law, but we believe there's even a greater law that Jesus talks about and someone who can do it. And we're not of those who are, we're not the ones who carry the law book around and judge who's keeping it or who's not. We simply say, hey, whether you're keeping it or not, whether you think you're keeping it or not, can you humble yourself enough to realize that you can't keep it perfectly? And if you can you realize that there is somebody who kept it perfectly? And if you realize that, can you realize that he died and shed his blood as appropriation for your sin and and reconciled you and forgave you and redeemed you from the power of sin? Can you and then gave you this righteousness, and it's all through faith. Can you look at Jesus? Okay, you break the law. He perfectly kept the law. He gave up his heir, his sonship and rights, and gave it to you in exchange for your heir of brokenness and sin. Do you believe that? If so, the promise that God's going to restore the world can come through us. That's the distinction we've got to make. Christianity is not a religion of do's and don'ts, but it is that God has done it. And we are marveled and overwhelmed and enthralled with that, to the point that that dictates then what we do and what we don't do, to the nth degree. Now I go to church, now I read my Bible, now I forgive, now I pray, now I do all these things as a reaction to the righteousness of faith, not as an angst to try to gain it. And I don't identify myself as those who do it and those who don't do it, but as those who look to Christ to do it for them and those who look to themselves to do it. And this is a huge distinction of how we do this. So I think that comes in this verse. I think the law brings about wrath. I think you could take this to mean a lot of things in verse 15. I think the wrath of God, because you can't do it. I think also the wrath of other people, honestly. I think people are angry and frustrated and annoyed with this faux Christianity that is all about the law, and it just makes people wrathful. And if you're honest with yourself, if you are a very law-driven person, I've got to do and crap, and if other people, you start getting angry that other people aren't doing what you're doing, and if you're like that, you also start doing is you get angry and wrathful at yourself when you don't seem to do it, when you're not doing well. You think that God and your approval is based on how good of a Christian you're being. And that idea of being a good Christian is a fallacy. It is a broken perspective on Christianity that is not biblical. Being a good Christian means being open about it, not being a good Christian, but looking to Christ and depending on Christ, that his faithfulness to rescue you, not your own. And that brings about a lot of wrath. And that is the reason a lot of people are turned away from Christianity, because the problem with the world, the reason why the world doesn't know the difference between religion and the gospel, is most people in the church don't know the difference between religion and the gospel, and it's got to change with us. Okay, so hopefully these are something to think about. Some great text here. What are you identifying? There's be other reflection questions that I ask to think about today. What am I identifying with? What do I say I am? For Randy, I'm a white, balding, 6'1", ex-soccer playing from Midland, Texas person. Is that who I am? Is that what I get riled up about? I vote this way or that way, or I do this thing, or I have this socioeconomic class. Is that who I am? Is that what I get riled up about? Is people who don't like those things and rally against those, and I got to preserve my rights as that kind of guy? Or as a person of faith in Jesus and just a lover of him, and that frees me from all kinds of wrath, so I can now serve and give my life so other people can have, so that this will be fixed, this thing called the world. And that's what it means to be an heir of the world. So meditate on that. Think about that. I think it can have some good implications for you the more and more you meditate on that. If we are a church who surrounds ourselves with that thought, it's going to do nothing but good stuff for us. So hope you're having a great day. Those are Randy's reflections on this brilliant verse, 3 verses that Paul wrote about in Romans 4. Check it out tomorrow. I believe Daniel Clark will be sharing some stuff with us. You're definitely not going to want to miss that. Hope you're having a great day. Let me pray for you. I thought about that. I never pray on these things. Let me pray to end us today. So Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the Bible. Thank you so much for Paul in this letter to the Romans. God, thank you that you are a God of promises. Lord, that you give promises. You don't just let the world kind of figure itself out, but you have intervened. You don't just sit up in heaven and watch the chaos, God, but you left all of the comforts and joys and all the applause that you got in heaven, and you came down and got booed on earth and beaten and bruised and broken, God, so that we who are bruised and broken and beaten and booed will one day get the applause that you deserve. And God, you are amazing. We follow you, not because you have a good law and it informs us of what we should or shouldn't be doing. That's true, but that's not why we follow you, God. We follow you because of faith. We believe that you are enough to satisfy us and not our performance, God. We believe that your performance record is way better than ours. And my trust and our faith as a church is in what you have done and what you are doing and what you will do, Lord. And we want to be a part of it. Holy Spirit, move in us today. Remind us to make our identity in these things and help us to fight to see your kingdom come on this earth and be heirs of the world as you called us to be. We love you, God, and we don't just say these things in some religious way, but God, we say in the name of Jesus all these things today. Amen. Have a good day, guys. Peace.